Very good morning to all my dear students. Today we will discuss about the amphibian graphs, and among the amphibian graphs it will be about the properties of cardiac muscle. So by end of this lecture you should be able to describe what are the various properties of cardiac muscle, what is the effect of stannius ligature, all or none law, staircase phenomena, and what is extrasystole and compensatory force. Now, in our amphibian practicals, the most preferred stimulus is electrical stimulus. So why do we prefer electrical stimulus? Now, in the body, all our action potentials are generated, and the transmission of all these impulses occurs by means of electrical signals. So, electrical stimulus is similar to that of action potential. Second and most important is the duration of stimulus, its strength, as well as frequency can be precisely computed. And for example, if you have chosen a stimulus of 1 volt, it can be repeated with the same strength as well as same frequency. So controlling the strength and frequency of electrical stimulus is very easy. And fourth and most important is after the stimulation, the recovery of the tissue occurs immediately. And the site of stimulation can be easily controlled. What we usually prefer for stimulation is electrodes, so which are of pinpoint size. So with the help of those electrodes, we can easily control the site of stimulation. Now, why do we prefer frog's heart? Frog is a cold-blooded animal, so it is not dependent on so much changes. It can easily withstand changes on pH, temperature, ions, and oxygen content of blood. At cellular level, the physiology is same as that of human. So the results can be easily extrapolated, and the results can be compared with that of human experiments. Second, it is easily available. It was cheap, harmless, and easy to handle. Nowadays, the experiments are banned, but previously they were easily available. Now, let us see the anatomy of frog's heart. This is what is a frog's heart. It has got a single ventricle and 2 atria. That is the left auricle and the right auricle. So, this is superior vena cava, this 2, and this is the inferior vena cava. So, this section is known as sinus venosus. Okay. So if you see the cross section, the flow of blood occurs from sinus venosus to atria, from both the atrium to the ventricle, and from the ventricle it goes to conus arterius. So this is how is the flow of blood, and the same pathway is followed for the impulse conduction. That is, the impulse is generated at sinus venosus. Now, sinus venosus is the pacemaker of frog's heart. Now, as in humans, we have sinoatrial node, which is a pacemaker. In frog's heart, it is sinus venosus. So, the impulse from sinus venosus goes to atrium, then from atrium to ventricles, and from ventricles, it disperses. Okay. Now, this is a typical experimental setup which is used for frog's heart. So, the frog's heart is dissected and then it is set up at a hook. So, this hook, whenever it contracts, it will pull, means the size of the heart will decrease. So, it will pull the liver down and this end will go up. So, the contraction of the heart is indicated by the upstroke of the wave. Okay, so this upstroke or downstroke totally depends upon how the liver is being adjusted. Okay, so in some books you might see that the contraction is downstroke, and in some books you may see the contraction is upstroke. So this upstroke and downstroke totally depends upon the adjustment of the liver. Now, this is how the hook is attached to the tip of the ventricle. Now, the most important thing we should take care is that when you attach a hook to the tip of the ventricle, see that you do not perforate it. Otherwise, the whole of the blood will come out and then the experiment findings would not be as correct as we want. So when you attach the hook, this care should be taken, and at the same time we should see that the heart doesn't get dried up at any point during the experiment. Okay, so this is a very typical experimental setup which is required during the amphibian test. Coming to next, what are the different properties of cardiac muscle? Now, to start with excitability. Cardiac muscle is an excitable tissue. Conductivity. The impulse which is generated at one part gets conducted to another part. So, conductivity is a very, very important property of excitable tissue. Autorhythmicity. Autorhythmicity is the property which differentiates cardiac muscle from both skeletal as well as smooth muscles. Contractility. Contractility is a feature of all type of muscles, whether it is skeletal, cardiac, or all or none law. Cardiac muscle acts as a syncytium. Syncytium means as a one functional unit. Then Treppe phenomena. Treppe means staircase. So staircase phenomena is another property of cardiac muscle. Next important property is prolonged action potential and long refractory period, and doesn't get fatigued, so it cannot be tetanized. So this is another very, very important property of cardiac muscle. Now, last time you must have seen this is the normal cardiogram. Now, why do we say it as a normal cardiogram? Because normal cardiogram, it records the mechanical events of the frog's heart. What is the difference between normal cardiogram and electrocardiogram? Electrocardiogram means it records the electrical event of the heart. In the frog's heart, we are not concerned with its electrical event. We are more interested in mechanical event. That's why this is known as normal cardiogram. Now, ideally, when the frog's heart contracts, it has to record three waves, that is of sinus venosus, which is a very small wave, then the atrial activity, and then the ventricular activity. Now, usually, the ideal recording is of three waves, but what we get is a usual recording of two waves, that is atrial activity and ventricular activity. So here, the contractions are seen as upstroke. So what is excitability? It is the ability of a tissue to respond to a stimulus. So what is a stimulus? Any change in the membrane potential means stimulus. Whenever a stimulus is given, this will cause change in the membrane potential, that is exchange of ions in and out across the cell membrane. And whenever you give a stimulus, a threshold stimulus, only then you will get contraction. So this is very, very important. It is not just giving stimulus, it is giving a threshold stimulus. So whenever you give a threshold stimulus to excitable tissue, only then you will get contraction. Then, what is the another name which is given to excitability? Vathmotropism is another word which is being used for excitability. So remember, sometimes, many books may mention the properties as vathmotropism, chronotropism, bromotropism, ionotropism. These are nothing but another name for the properties of cardiac muscle. So excitability, it means vathmotropism. Now coming to conductivity. Now conductivity, as I told, the impulse which is generated at pacemaker cell. So in frog's heart, it is sinus venosus. So from pacemaker cell, as you know, that the cardiac muscles, they have got intercalated discs, and it has got a lot of gap junctions which allows easy flow of ions. That's why the impulse can easily go from the pacemaker cells towards the cardiac muscles, that is the contractile cells. So usually there is slow conduct in cardiac muscle, whereas the human heart is blessed with a specialized conducting system, which is absent in frog's heart. So this is the difference between frog's heart and human heart. Okay. So human heart has got a specialized conducting system. Autorhythmicity. Very, very important property of cardiac muscle. So, the cardiac muscles are self-excited, means they do not depend on somebody else for excitation. They are capable of generating their own impulses. But the rate of generation of impulses can be modulated by the nervous system, means the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system can influence the rate of generation of impulses. And also there are few drugs which will either increase the rate or decrease the rate. So it is said that heart can generate its own rhythm, that is known as myogen, because myocytes. Okay. And it does not rely on CNS, that is neurogen. And there are special cells called as pacemaker cells where there is spontaneous development of prepotential. Okay. So whenever these prepotentials are generated, it leads to generation of action potential. So when these prepotentials, once it reaches the threshold, it will fire as action potential and then again repolarize. Okay. So this is what is a typical pacemaker cell. So this autorhythmicity is known as chronotropism. Now remember, rhythm means rate, chrono means number. So this is how you should remember. You break the words and you will understand the meaning. Chrono means number. Number means rate, heart rate. So autorhythmicity, the other name given for it is chronotropism. Or the rate, heart rate, another name is chronotropism. Now, to study how much is the heart rate of different parts of tissue, we have an experiment known as effect of stannius ligatures. Okay, so these are special ligatures. Okay. So now remember, we have sinus venosus, then atrium and ventricle. So here, okay, so see this crescent shape. So this is a point where you tie a ligature with a thread. Means you pass a hook beneath the point, means at the junction between sinus venosus and atria, okay, and then you tie a thread over here. That is a ligature. So what is going to happen? This will interrupt the transmission of impulses from sinus venosus to atrium. So as a result, what is going to happen? The heart is going to become quiescent. You might come across this word quiescent. Quiescent is nothing. It means the heart is alive but has stopped beating. So you get a quiescent heart. So after some time you see that. So this ligature is known as first sinus ligature. Means the first sinus ligature is tied at junction of sinus venosus and atria, and it corresponds to a structure that is white crescent line, WCL, okay, on the frog's heart. Now, once the heart becomes quiescent, because of its tendency of autorhythmicity, this atria will start generating its own impulses. So you get atrial rhythm. So on the kymograph, you will start getting atrial rhythm. So this is how it is. Okay. So this is a normal cardiogram. So you look, this is the atrial activity, ventricular activity. And then here once you tie sinus ligature, this is the quiescent heart. Means the heart is not contracting, just stop beating. And then you see there are some waves being generated. So you get the atrial activity and then the ventricular activity. But if you compare the rate, the atrial rhythm rate is less as compared to that of sinus rhythm. So this is what is the difference. So at this juncture we can conclude atria can generate its own rhythm, but atrial rate is less than sinus rhythm. So this is about the first sinus ligature. Okay. Now, at the atrioventricular junction, we will tie the second sinus ligature. Okay. So again, we have to demark this area and we tie a ligature at atrioventricular junction. So once you tie the second stannius ligature, the rate, this is going to interrupt the impulses from atria to reach ventricles. Means here the sinus venosus is having its own rhythm, atrium is having its own rhythm, but neither of the impulses can reach the ventricles. Now, what is going to happen? The heart again, it will become quiescent because ventricles form the major mass or the bulk, muscular bulk of the heart. So the ventricles will stop contracting. And after some time, you see ventricles will slowly start generating its own impulses because again ventricles also have autorhythmicity. So once the ventricles, they start generating their own impulses, it will start contracting. And again you get a ventricular rhythm on the cardiogram. Now what? If you compare this with the atrial rhythm, you see the ventricular waves are single waves. Okay, there is no atrial record over here. So this is also known as evioventricular rhythm. Okay. So once you tie a second stannius ligature, again the heart is going to become quiescent, and then you record a smaller wave, which is a single activity. This is ventricular activity. Okay. So this is what is effect of second stannius ligature. So what it proves again after you tie the second stannius ligature, that ventricles have the property of autorhythmicity. They can generate their own impulses. But when you compare it with that of atria, the evioventricular rhythm is less as compared to the atrial rhythm. So this is how you are supposed to understand the graph and give the conclusions. So how about we conclude? So this is another graph. Okay. So here you see this is a sinus rhythm. Okay. So here the pacemaker is sinus venosus. So from sinus venosus, the impulses are getting generated and they are getting transmitted to atria as well as the ventricles. Now once you tie the first sinus ligature, there is interruption of impulses reaching the atria. The heart has stopped beating, and then you see atrial rhythm is being generated here. When you compare, the rate is less than that of sinus rhythm. Again, you tie a second sinus ligature at atrioventricular junction, heart is become quiescent, and the ventricles, they start having their contractions. So this is very, very important thing. In this graph, you see there are three waves: sinus venosus, atrial, and ventricular activity. In this graph, you see there is only atrial and ventricular activity being recorded. If you look at this graph, there is only ventricular. Okay. So why ventricular only, not atrial is being recorded? Because the ventricular mass, muscular mass, is much more as that of atria. And as you know, the muscle mass decides the amplitude of the contraction. So this is clear. It's a very easy graph to understand. So to conclude, we say sinus venosus is the pacemaker of Frog's heart because the rate of impulse generation is highest as compared to atria as well as ventricles. Second, once you tie the first sinus ligature, it prevents the transmission of impulses from sinus venosus to atria. So it leads to generation of atrial rhythm. Once you tie the second sinus ligature over here, it prevents transmission of impulses from atria to the ventricles, because of which the ventricular rhythm is created. So this graph also says that that all the portions of the heart have got autorhythmicity, and when you compare the rate of generation, sinus venosus is more than the atria, which is more than that of ventricle. So this is what you have to conclude. So from this graph, three properties are there. First thing, the cardiac muscle is an excitable tissue. It has got autorhythmicity, and the rate of, the impulses are conducted from sinus venosus to atria and ventricle. And once you compare the heart rate, sinus venosus is more than atria, which is more than ventricles. I'm repeating it again and again because it's a very, very important class which are asked in the exam. Now, this is what is a mammalian heart. So, can we tie sinus ligature to mammalian heart? Can this ligature be employed? No, because they would cut off the blood flow of the coronary artery. So, when we tie ligatures, it is possible that we might deprive the heart cardiac muscle from oxygen and nutrition by cutting off the blood vessels. And if this supply is interrupted, the muscle may undergo necrosis and the heart may not remain viable for the experiment. And what is the clinical significance? As I told you with this experiment, we understand how the rate or the impulse is being transmitted to other parts of the heart. Means we are able to understand about the conducting system of the heart. So, as we know, SA node is a pacemaker, and whenever there is interruption of impulses, it leads to a condition known as heart block. So, this is what is the cardiac. I was able to manage few cartoons. So, here you see, this is the SA node, which is making the heart, the atria to contract. Okay. So, the electrical impulses are generated at SA node that stimulates first the atria to contract. So, as we know, SA nodes, where you have the internodal pathways, okay, which reaches the atria. So, from there, these impulses will cause atria to contract. And then suddenly, when it comes to AV, there is an AV node, means the impulse freezes for some point at AV node, because of which there is AV nodal delay. And once it crosses the AV node, what is going to happen? There is bundle of his which divides into right and the left side. And bundle of his reaches the Purkinje fibers, which causes contraction of the ventricles, and when ventricle contracts, it causes ejection of blood. Okay. So very cute cartoon. Now to understand, I had told previously also a poem that when the R is far from P, you have the first degree. So imagine this is the P wave, P pizza. So again, oh my mama mia, late again. So here it means this is P wave, this is the QRS complex. So the PR interval is more than 0.2 seconds. Okay. So whenever in first degree heart block, the PR interval is always more than 0.2 seconds. And most importantly is the PR remains consistent. Means there is constant PR interval which is less than second to second. Is it clear? Right. So this is the P wave which has got prolonged, and this is a QRS which is waiting for the impulse to reach. Okay. This is the second one. So longer drop. Then you have the D bands. So this is a DJ where there is progressive prolongation of the PR interval. And then suddenly there is a drop of the one QRS complex. Means one beat is drop. Look here. Okay. Then when some P's don't get through, you have mobiles too. It means there will be drop in Q. It means some P are not able to generate the QRS complexes. Okay. So here the PR intervals are usually identical before each QRS complexes. Look here, this monkey and this monkey. This section of the branch is same. Now look here, after this P, there is a drop in QRS complex. And when P's and Q's don't agree, you have third degree. Look here, the P waves and the QRS complexes have their own independent rhythm. They are not related to each other, but the PP interval and the QRR interval remains constant. Okay, remember this. But the PP interval is not equal to the RR interval. Means both of them are having their own rhythm. So this is very, very dangerous because the dissociation is evident which can increase the high risk of sudden cardiac death. See here. This is the QRS complex, this is the P wave again here. So he is not sure whether the impulse is going to be communicated ahead or not. So this is a third degree AV block. Means the P's and Q's don't agree with each other. The ratio is different. It can be either 2:1 or 3:1. So, but all impulses which are generated at SL node are able to reach the ventricles. That is what it is. So this is what is third degree. And this is the condition where usually the people need pacemakers. So coming to another very important property, that is contractility. Now, here the mechanical response overlaps the electrical response. So look here. The moment the action potential is being generated, means depolarization occurs simultaneously during the plateau. You see the contraction has got started. Okay. So here the mechanical response and the electrical response overlap each other, which is quite different from that of skeletal muscle. In skeletal muscle, first is the action potential and then you have the mechanical response. So here both of them, in cardiac muscle, both of them overlap each other. Okay. And if you look at the time duration, it is quite long. Okay. Almost 250 to 300 milliseconds. So that long is the action potential. Look here. So the force of contraction, this property is known as inotropism. So when we talk about inotropism, we are talking about the force of contraction. So drugs which increase the force of contraction are known as positive inotropic drugs, and which decrease the force of contraction are known as negative inotropic drugs. Okay, for example, adrenaline. It increases the force of contraction, so it is known as positive inotropic effect. And if we take acetylcholine, it decreases the force of contraction, so it is known as negative inotropic effect. Okay. So remember this word, inotropic means force of contraction. Now, heart acts as a syncytium. Okay, so why it acts as a syncytium? Because the cardiac cells are interconnected with interconnected discs, and these discs form permeable communications through which the ions can rapidly diffuse across. As a result of this, the action potential can spread very easily. This action potential can spread very easily through the lattice network intercommunications. Okay, so it means spreading throughout the cardiac muscle. And in heart, the atrial and ventricular syncytium are separated by a fibrous tissue. That is the AV bucket. So what is all or none block? Means it applies to the entire heart. So whenever a threshold stimulus or suprathreshold, so a stimulus which is greater than threshold stimulus is known as suprathreshold stimulus. So whenever a threshold or a greater stimulus is applied to any part of the heart, it causes contraction of the entire syncytium. Means the heart functions as a whole. It doesn't function as an individual unit. And that is very, very crucial for its mechanical function. So how do we demonstrate it? So for demonstration of all of the law, we have to make heart silent, that is quiescent. Means the heart is alive, but it has stopped beating. And how do we achieve this? We do it by tying a stannius ligate. So what do? We tie the first stannius ligature, that is at the junction of sinus venosus and the atria. Once we tie it, the heart becomes silent. And then what we do is we start with subthreshold stimulus. Okay. For example, 0.2 volt low contraction. So this is then you gradually go on increasing the strength of stimulus till you obtain the first contraction. The strength of stimulus with which we obtain the first contraction is known as threshold stimulus. And then, for example, if it was 1 volt, when you applied 1 volt stimulus, you obtain first contraction. Then you wait for 30 seconds, and then you increase the strength up to 2 volts. Again, you get a contraction. Then again wait for 30 seconds. and then increase the strength up to 3 volts and stimulate it. Now, every time when you're recording the stimulus, you have to rotate the drum, okay, and then record the stimulus so that the waves don't impose over each other. So this is what you obtain. So this is at the duration of 30 seconds each contraction. So this is at 1 volt, this is at 2, 3, 4. So what do we conclude? With subthreshold stimulus, there is no contraction, means no recording. We will get a contraction, that is a response at threshold stimulus. And if you see, irrespective of the strength of stimulus, the height of contraction remains same. So this is what is all or none law. Now, what is staircase phenomenon? Again, you have to be a quiescent heart by tying the first stannius ligature. Here, we will get repeated stimulus every 2 seconds. We are not waiting long. So rapid repeated stimulation is required, and we would be continuously recording the contraction at a distance of 1 centimeter each. This is what we see. So see, the height of contraction is increasing gradually. So what do we conclude? Whenever you give rapidly repeated stimulation, the first few contractions go on increasing in height. Okay, the amplitude goes on increasing, and once there is recruitment of all the motor units, irrespectively increase the frequency of stimulation, the height remains constant. And what is this thing known as staircase phenomena or trapeze phenomena? And why this occurs? It occurs because of the beneficial effect. Now, what is beneficial effect? It is because of increased calcium availability because of the prior contraction. Before all the calcium ions are pumped back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the second action potential arrives, because of which we have the extra calcium ions which contribute to a bigger contraction. Because of previous contraction, there is increased temperature. So that also increases the height of contraction. And previous contraction decreases the muscle viscosity. So all these 3 points contribute to beneficial effect, which causes pure contraction to increase in muscle. Now coming to prolonged action potential and long refractory period, which is the characteristics of cardiac muscle. So as I told you, the action potential is almost as long as 200 to 400 milliseconds. So once you see the phases, we have phase 0, which is known as rapid depolarization. So what it is characterized by rapid opening of the voltage dependent sodium channels. Okay. So these voltage dependent sodium channels are responsible for rapid depolarization. As soon as the sodium channels open up, rapid influx, which causes tremendous change in the membrane potential. From negative, it goes towards the positivity. So that is what is phase 0. Once the peak is reached, then there is a phase 1, which is known as initial rapid depolarization. So as we know that the sodium channels have got inactivation gate, which automatically closes after a few milliseconds. So closure of this inactivation gates, I mean the sodium channels, as well as this, at this point, the potassium channels also open up. So there is rapid repolarization. Means sodium channel influx is stopped, whereas efflux of potassium occurs. So rapid repolarization occurs. Then we have a plateau phase, that is phase 2. In plateau phase, what happens is, once we reach the potential of 35 millivolts, this calcium channels open. Okay, so there are 3 events occurring. First is inactivation of sodium channels, as well as the potassium influx is occurring. So, which will balance the, there is inactivation of sodium channels and there is calcium influx. So, calcium influx will balance the potassium influx, because of which the plateau is maintained. And then there is a slow repolarization process, that is phase 3. So in this phase, there is inactivation of L type of calcium channels. So the influx is almost minimal, and if you see the net balance, there is more of potassium efflux. So repolarization means more of potassium efflux, and finally we have phase 4, that is resting membrane potential. So this is very, very important to understand that it is this plateau phase which prolongs the duration of action. So look here. Okay, so this is rapid repolarization. This is initial rapid repolarization. This is the plateau, then slow repolarization, and then we have the resting membrane. Okay, so this, the mechanical event almost overlaps the electrical event. So if you look at this contraction phase, listen, okay, so the refractory period is very long, the systolic this thing, okay. So if you look here, almost till hardly 1/3 portion of the diastole is not included in refractory period. Okay, so the whole of systole and half of the diastole period is included in the refractory period. Because of this long refractory period, the cardiac muscle cannot be tetanized. Because as you know, for tetany to occur, the stimulus should, the muscle should respond during the contraction period. So, because the cardiac muscle is in absolute refractory period during systole, it cannot be tetanized. Now, what is refractory period? It's very, very important thing. Refractory period is divided into absolute refractory period and relative refractory period. But during absolute refractory period, the membrane can't be stimulated no matter how strong the stimulus is. So this is a very, very important definition of absolute refractory period. And it corresponds to the time when all the sodium channel gates are inactivated. Okay. So this is what is absolute refractory period. Now coming to relative refractory period, here the membrane can be stimulated by suprathreshold stimulus. Means the strength of stimulus is more than that of threshold stimulus, which coincides with the phase of slow repolarization. Okay. And why this happens? Because this is a time where the potassium gates are not yet opened, but few channels, sodium channels have restored back their configurational changes. So we have another experiment to prove the refractory period, that is the extrasystole, the compensated pause, and the post extrasystolic potentiation. So CP means compensated pause, PEP means post extrasystolic potentiation. Now look here. Here we give a stimulus during the contraction phase, that is the systole. What do you see? There is no change. Heart continues to beat as its own. So this is the sinus rhythm. You give a stimulus during systole, no change. Heart continues to beat. Then in the phase of diastole, you give a stimulus. What do you see? During diastole, there is a premature contraction, which is known as extrasystole. This is followed by compensatory pause. And then the first contraction is a bigger contraction as compared to the rest of ours. That's why we say it as post extrasystolic potentiation. Now this wave is followed by the regular contraction. So why this happens? Let us understand. So during systole, there was no change. So to understand the concept of refractory period, we are giving one stimulus in systole and one in diastole, because we have to understand which phase is absolute refractory period and which phase is relative refractory period. Because in absolute refractory period, no matter how strong the strength of stimulus is, it fails to evoke a response. Whereas in relative refractory period, a suprathreshold stimulus can evoke a response. So let us see what happens in systole. When the ventricles are stimulated in systole, there is no change observed. Means, no matter how strong the strength of stimulus was, there was no response. it corresponds to absolute refractory period. So the systolic phase corresponds to absolute refractory period. Now coming to diastole. Now here, when the ventricle was stimulated in diastolic phase, you see there is a premature contraction coming. Means the heart contracted, but this contraction came earlier than it was expected. Means see the gap between these two is more. See the gap between these two peaks, it is less. Means it is a premature contraction. So the term given for this premature contraction is extrasystole. So this extrasystole has occurred means this is a phase of action potential where the supracranial stimulus can evoke a response. So it corresponds to relative refractory period. That is the relaxation period or the diastole. So the diastolic phase corresponds to relative refractory period. Now, after you see this extrasystole, there is a compensatory pause. Now, why this is occurring? Now, just pay attention to this whole graph. These are the points. Okay, so see here, this is the rate of generation of impulse, sinus impulse. Okay, it is arriving from the sinus venosus, equally spaced. Now, look here, these impulses arrive to the ventricles, you get a peak. Here it has arrived peak. Now you have given a stimulus before the next impulse has arrived. Okay. So you have got during the diastolic phase when you have given the stimulus, you have got a premature contraction. But look at this. Here the next impulse fails to evoke a response, and then the impulse which has come here from the sinus venosus, if you see here, it corresponds to the systole here. So as the next impulse has come during the systolic, the contraction period of extrasystole, it fails to evoke a response. So this will continue like this. So the failure of the sinus impulse to generate contraction results in compensatory pause. Okay, so after the compensatory pause, when this impulse has come, see, you get the contraction. So I made this graph small, let us understand again. Okay, so here, this is the impulse from the sinus venosus, it has caused contraction, and during diastole when we gave the stimulus, premature contraction. But the next impulse, it arrived during the absolute refractory period of extrasystole, because of which it failed to evoke a response. Now the ventricle now has to wait for the next impulse to come from the sinus venosus. Okay, so that pause is known as compensatory pause. Now, after compensatory pause, you get the first contraction, which is more forceful than the usual beat. Okay, look at this. So this is known as exposed extrasystolic potentiation. Potentiation means bigger one. Potentiation means helping. Okay, so the post-compensatory pause has helped the first contraction to become a bigger one. So the name has been given as post-extrasystolic potentiation. And why this happens is because of the accumulation of calcium, okay, which was available for a longer period. So, the help of this graph, we can understand that the systolic phase corresponds to absolute refractory period, whereas the half of the diastolic period is relative refractory period, during which if we give a supracranial stimulus, we can evoke a response. So what is the benefit of this prolonged action potential as well as long refractory period? Now in cardiac muscle, the action potential is of duration of almost 200 to 400 milliseconds, with a plateau. Absolute refractory period, if you look at the duration, it is from 0.25 to 0.30 seconds. Whereas relative is very less, 0.05. Okay, so ARP is almost 5 times more than that of RRP. RRP, if you give a stimulus, it can cause excitation leading to premature contractions. Long refractory period, because of this, the heart cannot be capitalized. And because of this long refractory period, there is adequate time for the ventricles to fill. So if there is adequate filling, it can act as an effective pump. So the stroke volume as it is dependent on the diastolic volume. This is the filling of the ventricles. More the filling, better stroke volume we get. So this long refractory period helps the ventricles to be filled enough to give adequate stroke volume. So this is how the heart acts as an effective pump. And we attributed to the long refractory period, we say heart doesn't fatigue. Why it occurs? First is long refractory period. Second, the cardiac muscle has got rich blood supply and has got high capillary density. Okay. So the metabolic demands are fulfilled adequately. There is a lot of mitochondria in cardiomyocytes, which corresponds to almost 1/3 by weight of the cell. Cardiac muscle is the mammalian heart is completely dependent on aerobic metabolism. And as you know, wherever there is aerobic metabolism, there will be no accumulation of lactic acid. Accumulation of lactic acid is one of the contributing factors to induce fatigue in skeletal muscle. Now, as the cardiac muscles are totally devoid of anaerobic metabolism, there is no chance of accumulation of lactic acid within the cardiac muscle. And because of this ability to not to get fatigue, heart can beat throughout the lifespan of an individual. Thank you very much for your patient listening. After this, I will send you the link. Kindly respond to the MCQs which I have prepared on this topic. Thank you very much.